Good morning. My name is McCrindle, and I am a professor at the Faculty of Health Sciences at the University of Pretoria. Today we're going to talk to you about small-scale informal systems, food safety, and village grannies' chickens. On this slide you will see that One Health is an integrated, unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance and optimize the health of people, animals and ecosystems. The diagram shows how sectors and disciplines, One Health and society can all interact using communication, collaboration, capacity building and coordination to improve the health of people, animals and the environment. This in turn leads to improved food safety for everyone. The World Health Organization Global Strategy for Food Safety includes certain criteria. You need integrated digital health, evidence and production, health systems, surveillance, which is usually done by veterinarians and medical personnel, such as food inspectors and health inspectors, integrated knowledge and leadership, integrated healthcare and financing, gender, community equity and ethics, as well as policy, legislation and government. This integration is demonstrated by the diagram on the right, where you can see how the circles are linked. Food control and regulatory mechanisms in South Africa fall into different categories, as shown in the table below. Firstly, we have the National Department of Agriculture, which includes the Agricultural Product Standards Act, the Animal Diseases Act, the Animal Identification Act, the Animal Improvement Act, the Animal Protection Act, the Fertilizers, Farm Feeds, Agricultural Remedies and Stock Remedies Act, the Meat Safety Act, the Veterinary and Paraveterinary Professions Act, and the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectants Act. On the other hand, the National Department of Health, on the right-hand side, is in charge of the Foodstuffs, Cosmetics and Disinfectant Act, National Health Act, and the International Health Regulations Act. In addition to this, we have the South African Bureau of Standards, who make sure that there are standards with which all producers have to comply, whether they are commercial or whether they are small scale. It falls under the jurisdiction of the Department of Trade and Industry, and it controls canned meat, frozen and canned fishery products through the Standards Act. This slide shows the food supply chains, and they apply to the environment, farming and animal husbandry, harvesting, processing, transport and distribution, as well as preparation and consumption of food products deriving from animals and the environment, and farming. A formal food chain is defined as one which follows international and national legislated norms for food safety and quality. An informal food chain may be legal or illegal, but it does not conform to international standards of food safety and quality. A short food chain is one which goes directly from its producer to consumer and is usually informal or may be religious. It is legal. Here we see a long food chain. It starts with a livestock or poultry farmer. The product goes to auction, then to the abattoir, to the retail butcher, to the consumer, and quality control exists at many points in the whole chain. This slide represents a short food chain. And you can see that the farmer produces his own food for home consumption. In this case that we're talking about, it's eggs for consumption, or perhaps even slaughtering some of the chickens. Perhaps the farmer sells to a neighbor or a friend or at the local village market. And the purchaser will also use the product for own home consumption. This is what we call the informal market for livestock, and it should be remembered that the quality control rests mainly with the consumer of the product. Poultry food chains in South Africa consist of three types. There's a long chain, which is the formal, a short chain, which is informal, and a crossover. Examples of these in the long chain is broiler and egg producer, which is done by huge poultry enterprises with thousands and thousands of chickens. And these chickens or their eggs are sold to a wholesaler who sells them to a retailer, and sometimes they go to a restaurant and sometimes to a consumer. This long food chain gives a lot of scope for a mistake along the way that results to food poisoning. So food safety needs a lot more control in the long chain formal production systems. The poultry farms that we're going to look at in South Africa are short chain informal poultry consumption, where there are producers, an informal market, and a consumer, or the producer themselves, which is a granny, or who is the granny, is feeding the eggs to herself and her grandchildren. We also have a crossover production, such as broiler production, which goes to a registered abattoir, and the byproducts are sold into the informal market, and these are in turn sold to the consumers. These are not as safe because the informal market there is buying a product which was produced in a very intensive production system, and they are taking them home possibly just in a plastic bag, and tomorrow morning, early in the morning, they will go out, and at the side of the road they will put pieces of chicken into a frying pan and fry them and give them to the consumer. That chicken, perhaps, if things are optimal, has got a freezer pack attached to the raw chicken, but many times the cooking is done at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the same chicken is still being served to people at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, which results in a high proportion of food poisoning problems. The question remains, can you slaughter poultry at home and not in an abattoir? And the answer is yes. You can slaughter for own consumption up to a certain number of chickens, 25 units, and you can slaughter for religious purposes, for the Muslim faith, and also for indigenous religious or cultural purposes. Ritual slaughter of poultry is also permitted in abattoirs. In short chain informal systems, it's very easy for the poultry producers to be monitored by the state veterinary services. Poultry can be checked for notifiable diseases, and poultry health can also be checked by the humane societies. Villages can be assisted by poultry experts, and there are small-scale markets available for eggs and for poultry. One of the main problems is water purity controls, but this can be taught to grannies at a very simple level because many of them have cooking pots, and we suggest to them that they put the water in a pot and they put it over a slow fire outside or on a charcoal fire, wait till the water boils, and then put it into a drinking container for their chickens. These days you can also purchase water, but it's quite expensive. So this is a very affordable way of making sure your chickens have clean water. You can monitor facilities and equipment along all the food chains. The state veterinary services and the animal health technicians visit even very low-income rural communities often. And they can check the layout and design, the flow of work, processing and waste, the materials used, maintenance, any additions to the facility. For instance, a granny who decides to suddenly start farming with 150 chickens on a small holding might be a problem if their hygiene is not sufficient and the fly population multiplies faster than the chickens. Water quality can also be checked, and they can also check for effluent. For example, if people are washing all their poultry manure into the street and it's going down along the road, this obviously is a huge health problem. That is why the amount and number of chickens and the type of chickens in a small holding in a rural area would be checked by the state veterinarian and also by the community health officials. The in-product quality and safety assessment can also be done in small-scale poultry and egg-producing systems. The composition, nutrition, and ingredients are important. The shelf life of the product. The process inputs and outputs are also checked. They look for intrinsic control parameters, the storage conditions and transport conditions, and expected changes in food, such as biological, chemical, and enzymic, or sources of contamination, which are biological, chemical, or physical. Here is a quiz that you might like to do when you have finished looking at the presentation. What is this? Who is the producer? Who is the vendor? What's being marketed? Is this a short or long food chain? Are food safety risks high or low? What legislation is involved? What is the One Health view? What about ethics? And what about equity? And what about food security? Integrated health systems and environmental health systems. One of the things that I'd like to point out is the producer of what is being sold is very important. And it also highlights the importance of allowing local food production, because if the vendor had to travel all the way to town to buy chicken, frozen chicken or fresh chicken, bringing it home, cooking it only a day later, and cooking it in an open area where there are lots of flies, is possibly a little bit of a health risk. However, if the chicken comes from a poultry farm very close to where the vendor is selling to passers-by, it means that the chicken can be slaughtered freshly on the day and it can be consumed on the same day, and very little refrigeration is needed. A few cold packs would ensure that the chicken was kept cold, especially if it was frozen. Thank you very much for your attendance. Goodbye.